All right, everyone, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining myself and Sam today for our Apple Education Technology for Beginners webinar. I am Jim Grambois. I'm going to be co-hosting our webinar along with Sam.
Hi, everyone. Sam Weiss, Education Evangelist here at Jamf. Love doing webinars with you. I actually see some familiar names, so thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely. So, real quick, going over the agenda for today, we're going to give you a high-level overview of Jamf, who we are and what we do. We're going to move in and talk about front-end enhancements. And when we say front-end, we're talking about pieces that students and teachers will interact with. From there, we're going to talk about the back-end or IT-specific enhancements that Jamf and Apple have been working on, and then a great section on third-party applications for education that can bring your iPad project and deployment to that next level of engagement with your students and teachers alike. So, to kick things off, I'm going to go ahead and give you a high level of who Jamf is. So, at Jamf, our mission here is super straightforward. We want to help organizations succeed with Apple. We have a few ways to do this, but the main solution in that is Jamf Pro. Jamf Pro is our best-in-breed Apple management solution. For anyone who is a longtime Jamf fan, formerly known as the Casper Suite, Jamf Pro is its newer name. This is the tool you'll use to leverage Apple's education-focused solutions, as well as a whole host of other mobile device management features available on both iOS and macOS. So with Jamf Pro, you have the complete lifecycle management of both Mac and iOS devices. As we'll talk about in a little bit, you can integrate into Apple School Manager to allow for automation of device deployment and configuration, app distribution, and a whole lot more. If you're interested in setting up a zero-touch deployment strategy, we are working very hard to make that a reality using Apple's deployment programs in place. We're going to talk a little bit more how you're going to be able to make that a reality in your school through this webinar. With Jamf Pro, you get a few things. It's an easy-to-access tool. Any modern web browser is going to be able to get in and control your fleet. You can set up Jamf as a cloud or on-premise server. We integrate with tons of popular services in addition to the Apple programs that we're going to talk about, such as Active Directory, Single Sign-On, SCCM. Apple School Manager, we're going to spend a little bit more time going in depth today. And just as a recap here, formerly the Casper Suite, now Jamf Pro. So that's just a really high level on who Jamf is and what we do. Now I'm going to turn over to Sam to talk a little bit about Apple's history in the education space.
Thanks, Jim. And I mean, gosh, now is such an exciting time to be talking about Apple and education because there are so many bleeding edge features out, so many new programs for folks to take advantage of. But this is not new. Apple's been going hard in the classroom since the early 80s. In fact, Steve Jobs worked to change legislature in this country to allow corporations to donate technology to classrooms. So it's been a focus for many, many years. And what you see in that picture on the left side, in the 80s, that was the classroom of the future. Terminals put up against walls. But nowadays, ever since the iPad came out, it supports a new modern classroom of the future. So if you've stepped foot in a really innovative classroom or district in the last few years, some trends that we're noticing: soft seating, communal areas, more group projects that revolve around media and creation, not simply using computers as word processing stations. And thankfully, we live in a day and age where the iPad fits all of those needs. So Apple has come so far, and the iPad itself has come even farther. So we are now generations into the iPad, and again, year after year, we're seeing amazing hardware. And towards the end today, we're going to talk about some apps that specifically take some of the best advantage of ARKit and the onboard processors that I've personally ever seen. So super excited to talk about that. But hardware, useless without software. And iOS 11 has continued to mature, offer even more options. And as those of you that have been keeping up with the news, iOS 12 seems to be even more performant on older devices. So schools are able to get more years out of equipment that they bought several ago. Beyond all that, beyond the accessibility options that Apple bakes into their hardware and software, we have apps to enhance learning. And the App Store recently had a birthday, and we're still continually blown away by the success that independent and studio developers have creating meaningful solutions on the iPad. So today, we're really going to talk about the whole gamut here. We're going to talk about how you can manage that hardware, how you can get the most out of the software, and how you can find apps to enhance learning. Now, just to cover this agenda one more time, just to be completely transparent with everyone here, this was billed as a beginner's webinar. And the reason we're calling it a beginner's webinar is even though Jamf has white papers and YouTube videos that go super in-depth with workflows and best practices, what today is about is name recognition of all the new stuff that Apple's come out with. And the reason for that is we realize a lot of you are either already seeing students walk through your halls, about to see students walk through your halls, and you may not have time right now to deploy all of this stuff. But our goal today is to show you what's possible so that when you do decide to move forward or move to a more modern iPad management framework, that you're thinking about these things. If after this webinar you feel so inspired, come back to Jamf and say, in that webinar, 3 of those things I want to move forward with now, and we'll help you come up with a plan to get there. So rolling right into the fun stuff, and no offense, Jim, but I think I do have the fun stuff here.
Oh, boy.
We're going to start talking about the front-end enhancements. So what has changed in the classroom for students, for teachers, for instructors that make iPad a great fit for your classroom? The first off is the Classroom app. The Classroom app is one of my favorite enhancements to Apple's education offerings. And what it does is it gives teachers the ability to manage their classroom without extensive training or fear. And with literally just a few taps, a teacher can guide their students into applications, lock them in if desired, navigate students to web pages, or even specific chapters in iBooks. And similar to lab management pieces of software you may have seen or use in your district, a teacher actually has the ability to view a student's screen from his or her iPad. And the student will see that blue AirPlay banner, so we have a really great way to balance teacher needs with student privacy. And not to get too far into the tech on how this works, but a lot of it's built on Bluetooth. So if you are allowing students to take devices home, there's no worry about someone in IT having overreaching capabilities to see what's going on that iPad. Basically, if you can see it with your eyes from across the room, you have a way to see what's happening on that screen in almost real time. Now, there are some hardware requirements for the Classroom app. Highly encourage you to check out this Apple link at the bottom to find out even more about it. Also worth mentioning, before I click on to the next one, the Classroom app has evolved over time. So if you were familiar with version 1.0 when it came out, 2.0 added a lot of great features as it relates to airdropping, student use of device over time. So if you've looked at it, look at it again because there's, like I said, lots of great enhancements to that. All right, shared iPad. This is another huge paradigm shift for schools. Historically, iPads were single-user devices, and there's really not this concept of log in or log out. But in today's world, Apple School Manager and managed Apple IDs can allow your iPads to be used by multiple students throughout the day. So similar to a computer, they can log into their own personalized environment and be confident that their apps and content stay intact. So there's no longer this need to sync documents to a third-party service like Dropbox or Google Drive, which intrinsically have their own passwords, and it's just more to deal with. Now, because this requires managed Apple IDs, which we will talk about a little bit later, students receive 200 gigabytes of free iCloud storage to take the most advantage of this service. So, you might be thinking, when does this matter? If you have a cart of devices that goes throughout your entire third grade, a teacher could use it for a day, gets moved to someone else, that's a great use of shared iPad. If you have iPads that get used in the library for certain checkout projects, that's another great use of shared iPad. Like I mentioned, managed Apple IDs are required for this. There are also some hardware limitations as well. Now, you're going to see a lot of these jamf.it links on this webinar today. If you follow that link, you will find yourself in my webinar on shared iPad. It's about 35 minutes long. It goes into all the nitty-gritty details on what you need to know and how to set it up in Jamf. But like I said, this webinar is a beginner overview. So as long as you know that, yes, that is possible using Jamf, modern iPads, Apple School Manager, and managed IDs, then you have what you need to know. Now, self-service is another great teacher or student tool. And this is not a new feature to Jamf, but we've recently updated self-service. So self-service is a curated app store where you can put content, apps, and ways to configure settings that have all been approved by IT. So if one of your concerns is, well, how do we stop students from downloading any app that they want through the App Store, but still provide choice? Self-service is the best balance of that. Think about it as a curated app store by your institution. On macOS, this can be custom branded. So you'll see the Acme self-service. Doesn't say anything about Jamf. In fact, the dock icon doesn't show Jamf. But Acme was able to personalize this, make it feel like a part of their organization. So self-service is a great way to enable users to do what we call Tier 0 support. Without opening a ticket, without talking to IT, how can users solve their own problems? And self-service is a really fantastic way to do that. All right, now Schoolwork. This one is amazing. It's so fresh, so I'm really excited to tell you all about it. The Schoolwork app helps you and your students more effectively use the creative power of the iPad. You can easily distribute and collect assignments, keep an eye on student progress and educational apps, and collaborate one-on-one with students from anywhere in real time. And it is so easy for students to use too. Assignments can include traditional materials like photos and documents, but you can now incorporate files, websites, and this is the cool part, specific content within Schoolwork compatible apps. So assignments automatically appear on the iPad, organized by due date and class. And Schoolwork helps you keep track of how everyone in class is doing so you can tailor your teaching style to the needs of your students. Now, there may be some of you that are thinking, well, isn't this just iTunes U? Well, it's like a modern iTunes U without the public-facing option, but an extreme focus on apps that support ClassKit. So as you can see in this screenshot, when a teacher is putting out an assignment, we can assign app activities. And that's not just go use this app for 10 minutes. It's use this module within this app, and Schoolwork and managed IDs will all report that progress back to the teacher. So like I said, this is a really recent release from Apple that I expect to change the game in a big way. Keep your eye on Jamf because we are going to be telling amazing stories of schools finding success within Schoolwork. Again, this is a feature that requires managed Apple IDs, which again we'll talk about more in detail later on.
All right. Thank you very much, Sam. You do have a lot of fun stuff to talk about on the front end there.
I do, yeah.
You really do. But the back end, for those of us that want to hear about the IT side of this equation, I am very excited to share some of the updates with Apple, from Apple and us with you as well. I'm going to be spending a lot of my time today talking about Apple School Manager. So For those of you that might be new to mobile device management in general, if you haven't heard of Apple School Manager and you're an organization that's going to be managing any sort of Apple devices, I highly recommend that you go and sign up for this. Start that process as soon as you can. You can reach out to Apple reps to get you some help there, but it's a free program to sign up for. We're going to go into a little bit more about it. There's just a little bit of a process there. When you have Apple School Manager in place, this is one of the tools that really makes Jamf shine within your educational institution. So, Apple School Manager is a great tool that allows you to assign devices, purchase apps in volume, both free and paid apps, which will allow Jamf to manage them. This is where you'll create managed Apple IDs. It's where you'll connect your student information system, be able to automate creation of classes and those managed Apple IDs. A really cool piece there. And I already mentioned it is a free program available at school.apple.com.
Now, Jim, this kind of feels like some other programs that have existed from Apple.
Well, it's surprising that you say that. It actually is. Apple School Manager, for anyone who has been around Apple device deployment for a while, it is a combination of two former programs, the Device Enrollment Program, or DEP, and the Volume Purchase Program for Apps, or VPP. If either of those acronyms sound familiar to you, what Apple has done is they've packaged them together within Apple School Manager, added a few more really great features to the program, and gave you one unified portal to be able to go in and handle these specific tasks. So, thanks, Sam.
Yeah, and just for simplicity, Apple had those two different services that at the end of the day served a function. Now those functions can all be found within Apple School Manager.
Great call out. Great call out. So we've talked about managed Apple IDs a few times, Sam, and I wanted to just take a moment to go into what should I set up Apple IDs? I think that's an important question for anyone to answer.
Yeah, and education, Jim, has been on this roller coaster of do I need an Apple ID for so long? For those of you that were deploying iPads in the early days, gosh, we were creating Apple IDs on the fly and keeping spreadsheets, and that was untenable. And then iOS 9.3 came out, which removed the need to have an Apple ID to install an app. So for the short period of time, there were no great reasons to have an Apple ID outside of iBooks distribution. But now, Apple's changing the game when it comes to what can we do to track student progress in a super privacy-oriented way. Apple's doing more and more with shared iPad, which requires that iCloud storage. So as we're talking through these things, I think it's important to know managed Apple IDs is where Apple is heading. And if you want, the latest, greatest features like shared iPad and Schoolwork, you're going to need those managed Apple IDs. If all you're really trying to do today is deploy apps and software updates, enable lost mode, which maybe you're doing with Find My iPhone or Find My iPad right now, or you're just looking to use the Classroom app, none of that requires a managed ID. But I don't necessarily, if you're looking at these lists and say, you know what, Sam, there's nothing on that required list that I want to do this year. That's all right. Rest easy. Think about managed IDs for the future, though, because there is a lot of new content coming out that will heavily rely on those. And it's Apple's new strategy moving forward. Not something they're forcing on everyone because we're still able to accomplish a lot without them. Mm-hmm. But just because you don't need them today, not something to forget about completely.
I think that is just an awesome call out, Sam. Thank you so much there. So managed Apple IDs. Should you? If you want to take advantage of shared iPads, use the Schoolwork app, get your staff and students 200 gigabytes of free iCloud storage, yeah, let's get managed Apple IDs going. If none of those really make sense right now, let's just try and work that into the game plan because you'll likely be able to take advantage of that down the road. And to simplify that process, we mentioned SIS Integration, your student information system. Apple School Manager actually supports direct imports of users from PowerSchool, SunGuard eSchool Plus, as well as Infinite Campus to really streamline that process. So that's a couple of the kind of one-off things that we wanted to talk about with Apple School Manager. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. Here's a screenshot of the landing page when you log in. We're going to focus on the three main components of Apple School Manager today: people, devices, and content. On the sidebar, I have people in blue, devices in green, and content in yellow. For those of you familiar with Apple's legacy terminology, Apple School Manager, the devices portion there in green, well, that's a lot like DEP. The content portion there in yellow, well, there's our VPP of the past. The blue people section, that's a much requested and well-received new piece with Apple School Manager that we'll talk about here in a moment.
And if your district doesn't have a swear jar around VPP and DEP, get one now. Only because it will help you speak about these programs the way that Apple wants you to, which will let you work with us and your Apple SEs and DEs. So the more that we can get in that language of device assignments, volume purchases as a function of Apple School Manager, we all want to speak the same language.
No doubt. All right, so in the devices section, this is where you'll manage the devices you purchase and link them with Jamf. In this image, you're seeing a whole district's MDM server deployment, with each school having its own MDM. One of the nice parts about Apple School Manager is it can support more than one. So if you're at district level and you need to have multiple schools with instances, no worries, Apple School Manager has got your back. And then the other part of the devices section is, of course, assigning devices. So here's the screen that it will look like. And if this looks, if you've done any sort of management with Apple in the past and have used the deploy.apple.com interface, this probably looks super similar, and that's because it is. So this is going to look just like within the device enrollment program of old. This is the section in Apple School Manager where you'll assign purchases to your Jamf server. You have the ability to look up your devices via serial number, order number, or a CSV file to make things easy. All right, moving on from devices, we've now got content. So formerly the volume purchase program, apps and books get procured here within Apple School Manager. Really simple. You'll link this up with your MDM with Jamf, hopefully, and you'll be able to manage your devices, assign them to groups, and go on from there. You'll also be able to procure books and assign those to users from this point. The newer section that we're going to talk about is the people section. And as much as it may sound silly for me to say I'm excited about this, it really streamlines who does what within your school. So you likely have an administrator that oversees everything, but a content manager is someone who can log into Apple School Manager, procure apps and books, but can't move around MDM servers and devices. That's really great. That content manager has a specific task and they can go in and do it. The same idea exists for a device manager. That's someone who's handling the physical devices and needing to assign them to your MDM. Well, that person can't go in and buy a bunch of apps and books. They also can't go in and delete an MDM server. Good pieces of the puzzle all put in there. Of course, with managed Apple IDs, you'll also have the ability to assign roles such as instructor, staff, and students. And that's how you'll be able to take advantage of some of those really in-depth Apple programs such as Schoolwork and Classroom. Schoolwork specifically, actually. So all of these programs combined with an MDM like Jamf are going to get you to a zero-touch deployment model, which is just one of the best ways to save you time. It's student or it's user-led versus IT-driven, and it's all over the air. So we're going to take a quick moment to see what this actually looks like. If we can go ahead, and this iPad is set up with Apple School Manager, and it's fresh out of a box, but about to be automatically enrolled with Jamf. So we go ahead and we press that button, we click our language and select our country, connect up to Wi-Fi, and the iPad actually tells us that Jamf is going to install software on this and remotely manage it. You get a screen saying it's being configured, you skip most of the setup, and before you know it, you're on the home screen with a whole bunch of automated actions happening. You can see right here, we need to set a passcode. We'll go in and we'll do that quick here. And in just a moment, you're going to see the background change to a background that I had selected. And you're going to see my custom apps start to load on. I can go into self-service here, and this is actually on demand. Students, teachers, and staff alike can log into self-service. Again, as Sam mentioned earlier, that can be branded with as your school to get the specific apps that they need. So a really, really great way to get your devices up and going with minimal interaction from IT.
So that was a really great demo. If that went too fast for anyone, if you go to jamf.io, it is an interactive demo that shows you the setup process of a zero-touch deployment. So you can kind of click through it at your speed. But yeah, great stuff, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you.
So where are we at now? We have hardware. We can get it enrolled in Jamf. We know how to buy apps. But now what? You know, iPads by themselves are great tools, but without supporting applications, without education-focused apps, you're really going to be stuck using the native tools, which are fantastic. GarageBand, Pages, Keynote, Numbers all have their place in the classroom. But what I want to show you today is some of Apple's ecosystem of apps that are truly making a difference in the classroom. Now, few special things about these apps. These are great apps that teachers love. They've all built communities surrounding the use of them. They're highly rated on the App Store, and the teachers that I've spoken with are all very excited when it's time to implement this into their curriculum. These are not just one specific, topic app. These are learning platforms that can be flexible and can really fit in a lot of different scenarios. And my favorite part about this is every app that we talk about today is going to be ClassKit enabled and Schoolwork compatible, which means that Schoolwork app that we talked about before, kind of that central place for a teacher to keep track of students' progress on written, video, website, and app-based activities, these apps all work with that. So just to start off, I want to talk about Kahoot. Kahoot is a really fun game-based learning platform. And it's really easy for a teacher on a browser to create these learning games called Kahoots. And their format allows you to add videos, images, and diagrams to your questions to amplify that student engagement and really make formative assessments fun. What I think is also really cool are live games are displayed on a shared screen. So everyone can keep track of score. It helps everyone unite lessons with greater class participation. And students answer these questions on their own devices. And with the challenge feature, teachers can even assign these Kahoots as homework as well. What's really great to know, Kahoot is free for schools and teachers. But this app is not limited just to education institutions alone. A lot of companies and organizations and enterprises look at Kahoot as a great way to do corporate training as well as event participation. So definitely check out Kahoot. It is Schoolwork and ClassKit compatible. So hopefully you find a great use of this in your environment. Jamf.it/Kahoot is where you can go to learn more about this app. All right, next up is Tynker. If you've seen my other webinars or have looked at some of Apple's suggested coding curriculum, you probably recognize Tynker. They are a learning platform that teaches programming and has curriculum ranging from kindergarten through 8th grade. And students engage in really thoughtful activities like designing games, building apps, flying drones, and other projects that really help bring coding to life in the real world. And recent updates have introduced elements of Minecraft and augmented reality. Mm-hmm. Kids love their Minecraft, and so they can get that experience here right inside Tynker. What I think is really great is there are scaffolds of learning here. Tynker starts with visual-based block coding, but that quickly expands to JavaScript, Swift, and Python. The first 2 lessons are free. The Space Cadet and Dragon spells are free, and they're actually the same pieces of curriculum that Apple includes in their coding curriculum guide. But Tynker does offer their full curriculum in subscription plans for home as well as the entire school. Tynker, definitely someone to check out. Jamf.it/Tynker is one place that you can go to find more information on that. And as we're going through this, if any of you have opinions on any of these apps that we're talking about that you'd love to share, drop it in the Q&A. So this is one, when I found out it existed, I'm like, oh man, really wish that existed when I was a student. It's generally well known that flashcards are some of the best ways to help commit topics to memory and are helpful in almost any subject, but are most well known for science, foreign language, and history, but really have their place everywhere. What Quizlet does is it takes that flashcard experience that we all grew up with and makes them digital, which in this case makes them much more useful. So students and teachers can create their own sets of terms and definitions, and from there can use them in several different modes. If what you want is just that traditional flashcard experience where you tap a card to flip it over, you can have that. But there are modes that will turn these into multiple question tests, a write-in test, a matching game, and many more options that just aren't available with 3x5 note cards. And this ability to create and share flashcards with friends in the rest of the world is huge. So while preparing for this webinar, I had the opportunity to chat with colleagues in my area, and I can't tell you how many fresh college grads threw up their hand and say, oh my gosh, Quizlet helped me pass, this foreign language class or this history class. The core service of Quizlet is available at no cost. There are very low-cost upgrade options for both students and teachers, but again, important to realize, totally Schoolwork and ClassKit compatible. So if you're interested in learning more about Quizlet, check out jamf.it/Quizlet. And this one,
so excited,
is so much fun. Oh my gosh. Preparing for this webinar was fun because I got to go out and explore some of the best apps from the App Store, but none of them were as immediately impactful for me as GeoGebra AR. So for anyone that's used the Grapher app in macOS, this is going to feel super similar. Using ARKit-enabled devices, GeoGebra AR projects 3D graphs of multiple variable functions and planes. And it literally brings this abstract concept into the real world, and I was so impressed when I tried it out. Now, this is a WebEx video, so it may be stuttery for you, but it is smooth as butter on our side. GeoGebra AR lets you walk around and even get inside some of these objects. And some of the activities that they suggest are take screenshots of internal structures and underlying geometry. So you're able to see in this video, I'm able to get above and underneath this really cool 3D function. And students can manipulate their equations in real time and see the results of that. So again, I think a big struggle within math is how does this apply to the real world? And when you can physically show someone, what does this mean in the real world? It can really make the difference between surface level and a deep level of understanding. If you have an AR-compatible device, you need to download this app. Even if it's just to test it out and see what the possibilities of AR in iOS are. So please check it out, free download. GeoGebra as a company has a few other graphing calculators, but go download this one because it's super cool. And lastly, eSpark. So eSpark is a company that we've had a partnership with for several years, but they solve the big problem of what are the other apps in the App Store that actually make a difference for students, and how can I make my job easier so I'm not constantly getting app requests from teachers? How do I make sure that the apps that I'm getting are standards aligned? And what eSpark does, it's a very big concept, but to boil it down into 4 bullet points, eSpark analyzes every single individual student's standardized test results. So in a second grade classroom, you know that there are students that are reading at a kindergarten level. You may have students doing math at a third grade level. Every student is different, and eSpark realizes that. eSpark then both buys and builds a playlist of apps that directly address these identified focus areas for you. What that means is you don't have to go into Apple School Manager and make these purchases. You don't have to look at a student's results and build out that plan of apps that will specifically address their areas of deficiency. eSpark does all of that for you. And then for the admin, eSpark uses the Jamf API to dynamically push and recycle these apps in almost real time. And what that does is it saves you money. Instead of buying 30 copies of the same app for 30 students, you can think of it more like a library. You buy 2 or 3, and students check them out as necessary, and eSpark will handle literally all of that for you. And beyond just making sure students have the right content at the right time, they offer creative challenges to establish a higher order of learning. And a lot of times that looks like, hey, student, reteach that lesson that you just learned in video format back to the iPad to prove that you did actually learn it. And a lot of classrooms using eSpark have these cute little tents. They're eSpark recording studios or recording booths, and they make it a really fun time for the student, but they're also teaching them public speaking and presentation skills at the same time. eSpark is Schoolwork Class Kit compatible for teacher assignments. And you can find out more about this partnership at jamf.it/eSparkLearning. So, wow, Jim, it's been 37 minutes already. But
dang,
we talked about a lot.
We did, absolutely.
So just to recap my side, for these front-end student and teacher enhancements, we talked about shared iPad, how to turn an iPad into a multi-user environment using Jamf Pro, managed IDs, and Apple School Manager. We talked about Classroom, which gives teachers that device management in the classroom. We talked about Schoolwork, that requires managed IDs but gives teachers a fantastic way to pass out activities, whether those PDFs, documents, web pages, or specific activities and apps, as well as self-service, giving students the ability to solve their own problems.
Absolutely. And then from the back end, we talked a bit about Apple School Manager and really went in depth along the 3 main pieces of it: your device assignment, your content procurement, and then your people, the role assignments that you'll do there. Keep in mind, Apple School Manager is a free program at school.apple.com, and if your organization is managing any sort of Apple technology, we strongly recommend that this is a service that you get signed up for just as soon as you can. Really, really helpful for a lot of pieces.
Yep. Even if you're not managing your devices today, the moment you decide you want to, you are going to need Apple School Manager. So
really good idea.
Do that sooner than later. And then we wrapped it up with great third-party apps for education, all our Schoolwork and Class Kit compatible, which really drives Apple's vision of the future of how do we get the most out of our iOS devices. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Hope you learned something.
Come by. We're going to have more webinars down the pipe here as well. Check out jamf.com for a ton of great resources, and have a phenomenal rest of your day.